Greetings America. Today on Censor Wars. The globalist Democrat smear machine. One of the most under-discussed yet consequential changes in the American political landscape is the reunion between the Democratic Party and the country's most extreme and discredited neocons. A newly formed, well-funded national security think tank provides the most vivid evidence yet of this alliance. Calling itself the Alliance for Securing Democracy, it functions as a kind of Southern poverty law center for the internet. It labels content creators and media outlets as fake news, then because of the new Disinformation Act, signed into law by President Obama a few weeks before leaving office, anyone labeled as unreliable by the group can be countered with propaganda ran by this network of think tanks. The most important and dangerous group run by the Alliance is Hamilton 68, which just announced an upgraded version for the 2020 election. This organization basically set the entire narrative during the 2018 midterm elections. Let's take a deeper look at this propaganda organization.
A disturbing new twist in the Russian hacking attempts, and all the fingers point at the Dems.
The New York Times did some digging and found a report titled The Alabama Project, and figured out those weren't Putin's bots at all. They were faked, dressed up to look like Russian bots.
We orchestrated an elaborate false flag operation that planted the idea that the More campaign was amplified on social media by a Russian botnet.
A new New York Times report accusing a Democrat billionaire and his cronies of using fake Russian bots designed to create a fictitious link between the Kremlin and Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore.
The guy who allegedly financed all of this is billionaire Reid Hoffman, co-founder of LinkedIn, and apparently a guy with a really faulty moral compass.
Facebook has suspended the accounts of some of these people because what they did was serious. From the Washington Post, Facebook suspends 5 accounts, including that of a social media researcher for misleading tactics in Alabama election. Facebook has suspended the account of Jonathan Morgan, the chief executive of a top social media research firm, after reports that he and others engaged in an operation to spread disinformation during the special election in Alabama last year. Morgan confirmed his account suspension after Facebook said in a statement that it had taken action against, quote, 5 accounts run by a multiple individuals for engaging in coordinated inauthentic behavior, end quote, adding that its investigation is ongoing. Facebook did not provide a list of the accounts that it suspended, and Morgan declined further comment.
While many content creators have reported on the Roy Moore false flag, there's a larger issue that many commentators failed to discuss that's even more important. You see, the Roy Moore fraud is just the tip of the iceberg. So, who is Jonathan Morgan? Other than being the CEO of New Knowledge, according to business journals? Well, according to Securing Democracy, he helped design Hamilton 68.
Weekly Standard founder and Twitter enthusiast Bill Kristol has helped launch a venture you probably never heard of. It's called Hamilton 68, and it's designed, they claim, to combat Russian disinformation on Twitter. But it's having a bit of a hard time and seems to be spreading disinformation of its own. For example, Hamilton 68 was behind the claim that the Release the Memo campaign to expose FISA abuse by the FBI was just a Russian plot with no support from actual Americans.
See, under their analytical techniques, it states, in order to identify the most relevant accounts for each, we employed social network analytical techniques largely developed by J.M. Berger and Jonathan Morgan. Okay, then it goes on to state, in addition to the metrics above, which are described in detail in the linked papers, we also employed a fast in-groupness IQI metric designed by Morgan. So really, the takeaways here are that Jonathan Morgan was the main designer of Hamilton 68.
What is Hamilton 68 and what has it done?
So I wrote about it when it was formed not even a year ago, last summer, because it was yet another example, probably the most vivid one yet, of this kind of union between Democrats on the one hand and neocons on the other. I guess I should say reunion, since neocons began as Democrats, migrated to Republicans, and are now back with Democrats again. And it's essentially a group that was, as you said, started by people like Bill Kristol, people who have been leading neocons from both political parties, CIA officials, the people who basically have been disseminating disinformation throughout the entire war on terror, the least reliable, most warmongering people in Washington. And they said that their purpose of their group was to combat disinformation and the attack on the American democracy by Russia and other groups. And their main kind of feature was that they would have this dashboard called Hamilton 68 that purported to track the activity of Russian influencers on Twitter by tracking 600 accounts. Nobody knows which accounts they've designated as influence of Russia. They're not necessarily Russian. They're just people who, in the eyes of Bill Kristol and his friends, are people who espouse Russia or pro-Russia themes. And they just constantly make claims about what Russia is doing on Twitter that the U.S. media, in the most shocking way, uncritically ingest and puts into their headlines as fact about what Russia is doing.
So they're basically running their own propaganda campaign.
The takeaways here are pretty clear, okay? The bots they supposedly detect aren't all in Russia. They have no real clue of where they're at. And because Twitter has so many bots anyway, determining which ones are Russian and which ones aren't is impossible. And a lot of U.S. marketing companies and political organizations use bots. It's impossible to distinguish those from Russian bots as well. So the takeaway is this: Hamilton 68 doesn't work. And all the stories based on Hamilton 68 about Russian bots, which is most, if not all of them, are fake news.
Tell us a little bit about Hamilton 68, what it does, and who founded it.
This is extraordinarily important because it's part of the German Marshall Fund, which is largely funded by the U.S. government. So this is the U.S. government funding an organization. Hamilton 68 is a dashboard for your internet to let you know what the Russians want you to think about. So presumably you think about something else or else. But the whole idea is part of an organization within the German Marshall Fund that's headed up by people like Mike Morell. Mike Morell is a pissed off guy because he was going to be the head of the CIA under Clinton. You know, he was the acting CIA director under Obama, and he was going to be tapped to be CIA head. And doggone it, how dare Trump win? Deprives him of his the peak of his career. But it's not only neocons like Morell. It's Bill Kristol. Bill Kristol his organization is being funded by the U.S. government to tell the rest of us who's propaganda and who's not. This guy with a track record of zero being right about anything, but with an enormous neocon agenda. These are the people behind the scenes who are being entrusted with telling the Americans what they're allowed to watch and what they're not allowed to watch. And James, I'm sure you've probably looked at it. The other characters involved in Hamilton 68 are just as bad. Chertoff, this creep who made a fortune selling junky metal detectors to the airports after he created the phony color-coded terror alert to terrify everyone. So this is a very dangerous partnership between the nonprofit, non-government sector and the government itself.
Absolutely, and all of those characters definitely need more scrutiny and examination. And for people who are interested, just type in Chertoff Rapiscan into the Corbett Report search bar, and you'll find my previous reports on that swindle and all of these other characters. Bill Kristol, of course, should be laughed off the face of the planet by his, probably should be behind bars, but at any rate should be laughed off the face of the planet for the predictions about the Iraq War and how all that was going to pan out. And of course, people are still listening to him because now the new narrative is that we are back in the Cold War. It is head-scratching from a sane perspective, but I know that things have become insane in the American political context over the last couple of years, and up is down, black is white, left is right. All of this craziness has turned the board topsy-turvy, and people don't know what to do, and a lot of people are starting to believe in these intelligence agencies that they once derided, and all of these things are now, we're now seeing this.
What's the agenda behind this? I'm a little confused by it.
It's twofold. One is these are the people who have actually been obsessed with the idea that we should be at war with Russia for forever. Back in 2008, when the president of Georgia attacked two provinces that viewed themselves as more aligned with Russia, and the Russians went and confronted the Georgian government about it, people like John McCain and Marco Rubio and that whole neocon crowd, Bill Kristol, were essentially calling for NATO to go to war with Russia over Georgia. They've been obsessed with Russia forever and have wanted the reinvigoration of a new Cold War. That's part of it. And then the second part is domestic, which is that whatever views they dislike, namely on the left wing of the party that's anti-imperialism and anti-war, the left wing of the Democratic Party, or the kind of isolationist, paleo-conservative wing or libertarian wing of the Republican Party, they want to smear as being aligned with the Kremlin. So whatever views are on the right wing of the party, like release the memo, or on the left wing of the party, like, you know, anything relating to Bernie Sanders, they'll just declare to be a theme of Russia and then accuse everybody who advocates it, Americans who advocated on Twitter, of being part of a Kremlin disinformation campaign.
You and I are on different sides, and we both had that happen to us, so we know firsthand.